There's a lot that goes into prepping a podcast, and beyond all the gear and equipment comes planning the actual content of your episodes. So let's cover the two most common ways that people prepare for their episodes, which is to either create a script or an outline to guide them through each episode. Some podcasters use scripts that are read word for word, while others stick to a bullet point style outline. There's no right or wrong. It's all about what works best for you and your specific show. Definitely keep your audience in mind, because while some people are naturally good at speaking off the cuff, others really do need structure to stay on topic or just to be coherent. Do not force your listener to sit through many minutes of emptiness while you figure things out in real time. I am speaking very broadly here. There are some people who don't do either of these things and create fantastic podcast episodes just off the top of their head. But for most of us mere mortals, it does really help to have something to guide you through each episode to make it worthwhile for the listener. You can script and outline your show by hand, just writing it out on a notebook or a piece of paper or the back of a napkin or whatever you want. I would strongly encourage you to use some type of software, whatever you're comfortable with. I think using cloud-based software is the absolute best, and there are a ton of app options. I guess you could call them options out there to help you script and outline your episodes. The one that I use the most is just the Apple Notes app that comes with an Apple device. It's the free app. And the reason I like the Apple Notes app is because it syncs across all my devices. So I have an Apple computer, an Apple tablet, an Apple phone, and then it all kind of goes together. It sounds weird to call it an Apple phone. I have an iPhone, and then they all sync together. And so that way, if it's like right before bed and suddenly I have an idea, I can put it in the Notes app, and then the next day when I come into my office and I like turn on the computer, everything I thought of is still right there. I also really like the Notes app, super easy implementation of checklists. So that way you can even put bullet points and just sort of check them off as you're going throughout your show. Something that I found really does help me stay on track a lot as I'm running through different episodes. But there are a ton of other options that are cloud-based like that, Google Docs probably being the most common and the most popular. I do think that Google Docs does have an edge over Apple Notes if you're working with other people, because the ability to just sort of like collaborate and share a single application in real time is incredibly helpful. So if you're working with other people on your show, it might be worth going the Google Docs route. You can create shared Apple Notes as well, but it's not quite as real time as Google Docs is. Whatever application you're using, you might think, what should my script or my outline look like? If you've ever looked up a script from a TV show, or you've been part of a play or something, you've seen scripts have very specific formatting. The important thing for right now is just to make sure that it actually makes sense to you, that you can remember what you meant when you come back to these notes later on, and that it also makes sense to anyone else if you're working on the show with other people. And speaking of things that can help make your podcast workflow better and more accessible, I'd like to thank Buzzsprout for sponsoring this video. Buzzsprout has been my podcast hosting platform of choice for many years, and they've got everything you need, all kinds of tools and resources to not only start podcasting, but keep podcasting. And regardless of whether you're using a script or an outline for your episode, you probably want things to sound their best. So something that I use on every one of my episodes in Buzzsprout is Magic Mastering, which really does live up to its name. Magic Mastering is kind of like an automatic personal audio engineer that processes your episodes to give them a consistent broadcast quality sound by adjusting the EQ, leveling out volume between speakers, reducing noise, and polishing your voice to make sure your episodes sound great, whether someone is listening through high quality studio monitors or just the tiny speaker on their phone. And even though I try my best to make sure things sound great while I'm actually recording, Magic Mastering just kind of gives me that extra peace of mind that I know things will sound as good as possible on the widest variety of listening devices possible. And of course, beyond Magic Mastering, Buzzsprout has everything you need to get your podcast uploaded and listed in all the major directories, analytics and tools to help you connect with your audience, and so much more. So if you're thinking of starting a podcast, or you already have one and you want to switch to a host that better suits your needs, be sure to use the link in the description to check out Buzzsprout. Now, let's dive back into the planning process for your podcast. Something I really do want to emphasize that I used to tell my digital media students all the time is that the more you spend on planning and pre-production, the easier everything else will be. I understand the urge to just say, I got a basic idea. Let me press record. Let me get to the equipment. Let me start editing. Like, that's the really fun stuff. For a lot of people, the pre-production is the part that they have to get through before they get to the fun stuff. Some people love it. And if you're one of those people, I think that's a huge advantage. But I promise you, the more time you spend planning and working in pre-production, the easier everything else is going to be. I often had to remind students that we write very differently than we speak. And so sometimes students would write something down, whether it was a script or a speech or whatever, and they would never speak it out loud until it came time to present it, and then things just felt very different. Even though there was nothing wrong with the way it was written, it didn't sound right when it was spoken. So if you're scripting out a podcast episode, make sure it's going to feel natural when you actually speak it, not just that it looks great on paper. It is going to take some practice as you're working with your scripts to capture your authentic voice and your purpose. But the beauty of a script is that it really does help keep you on track and keep you accurate. So if you're doing a podcast that requires a lot of information, a lot of facts, a lot of accuracy, a traditional script can be incredibly helpful because you don't have to trust yourself to just remember those things. You know that you're going to get it right because it's in the script, and hopefully you've researched it and checked it before you put it in the script. As someone who makes YouTube videos and does a lot of tutorials and reviews, sometimes I need to know specific specifications of products, and it can be hard to remember 44,000 kilohertz versus 48,000 kilohertz and 32-bit float and all these different things. So having those tech specs listed in a script, or at least maybe a more detailed outline, really helps me know and feel comfortable that I'm making the best video possible. Same thing applies to podcasting. It can also really help you as the performer during the podcast because you're not worried about remembering all these things. You're just focused about communicating clearly and effectively. But the flip side to this is that when it comes to traditional scripts, one of the biggest hangups that people have is that they try to read everything word for word. And if they accidentally flip something or say something slightly differently, they feel like they need to stop, go back, and redo it. That is usually not the case. There are those very specific times when it's super important that your script needs to match exactly what's written on the paper. The thing you say needs to be exactly what's on the paper. For the most part, I would say the vast majority of times, if you flip around a couple words, you skip some things, you improvise a little bit, nobody's going to know. It's probably going to help things feel a little bit more natural and make a little bit more sense. Your point, your purpose, all of that is still going to come across clearly. So don't get hung up if you're not reading every word of every sentence on every line perfectly. As long as you're hitting the main points and you're communicating the things that you intend to communicate, you're going to be fine. And that really just means that the big thing you're going to want to differentiate in your script are lines that are meant to be said and anything else that's more of a stage direction or a note that's not meant to be said. For example, if you're narrating something and then you plan to cut to a clip from a pre-recorded interview, making sure you understand how that's going to work in your script in a sensical way is going to be important. Maybe adding brackets or parentheses around the interview or the stage direction, maybe even different fonts or colors. Anything that helps you know it's not a line that needs to be read will be beneficial. Because you really don't want to find yourself saying something like, at the age of 96, Beatrice learned something that would change her life forever. Cut to interview of Beatrice. You want to differentiate, at the age of 96, Beatrice learned something that would change her life forever. And then you know, whether it's live because you're doing everything in one take or later in the editing process, cut to the interview where she gives this super beneficial advice in secret. And these types of indicators are also important anytime you plan to do music cues or other production elements, even pauses for effect, especially if you're trying to do everything on the fly, like I mentioned a moment ago. If you're going to take your podcast and you're going to edit it, then it doesn't really matter if you accidentally read a stage direction because you'll just cut that part out. But if you're trying to maybe edit as little as possible and do everything on the fly, or you're somebody who's even doing like a live stream broadcast of your podcast, then you really do need to know what you need to read and what is just a direction for you to pause, for you to play a music cue, for you to cut to an interview, all those kinds of things. However you can format your script in a way that makes sense for you is the right way to do it. And finally, when it comes to reading your script, even if you don't look at yourself as a performer, you are performing. You're performing that script. It does take practice to not sound like you're reading. It's one of those things you're going to continually get better at it over time. It's a muscle that you can build up to make it sound like you're not reading off of a script. It's always important to remember what you're trying to communicate, and sometimes that's just the kind of thing that takes repetition and practice. But don't forget, you are human. I'm assuming you're human. Humans make mistakes. Humans stumble over their words. Humans sometimes need a few seconds to gather our thoughts. Reading a script is a skill, and it is something you will get better at over time. But if you make a couple of mistakes or you stumble over your words here or there, if it doesn't obscure the purpose or the meaning or waste the listener's time, it's not something you necessarily have to redo or cut out. It's totally okay to be human in your podcast that is created by a human. But if writing everything out word for word in a very specific script isn't what works for you or your show, then an outline might be the way to go. Outlines are usually made up of bullet points, and you might want to have some specific details in each bullet point, but it's not really scripted out fully. You just kind of go through your bullet points, and by the time you get to the end, you should hopefully feel confident that you've covered the topic that you intended to cover. But I do encourage you to be realistic with your bullet points. It does take time to understand how many words on a page translate to how many minutes in a podcast. Scripts are a little bit easier because you can see everything written out. Bullet points, sometimes I've seen people go, okay, I know the topic of my show. They have one main bullet point. They're super fired up to talk about it. And then they find 7 minutes into their hour-long episode, they're kind of done talking, and now they have 53 minutes left to fill. So even though you're not scripting everything out word for word or line by line with your bullet point, you are still structuring your episode. Here's a bullet point. I'm going to talk about that thing. That bullet point might take 3 to 5 minutes, so that'll lead into this bullet point. Maybe that'll take 2 minutes. That'll lead into these bullet points. These will take 15 minutes. That'll lead into this segment, and that's going to give your episode that skeleton structure that makes sure you know by the time you're done, you put a bunch of podcast meat on those skeleton bones, and now, this is a weird analogy. But now, here's a question for you. If you've written your script or you've written your outline, how are you going to access that while you're recording? If you're doing an audio-only podcast episode, congratulations, you've unlocked the secret of how to do that easily because you can just read it on your computer screen or your tablet or whatever while you're recording, and no one will know because there's no cameras recording. But if you're in a situation like I'm in right now, I don't really want to be looking down at a piece of paper and reading off of that or reading off of a computer screen the whole time. So how do you access your script if you're creating a video podcast? At this point, a teleprompter might be a smart investment. If you're not familiar with them, a teleprompter is a reflective piece of glass that kind of goes at an angle in front of your camera with a screen mounted below it. The screen reflects into the glass, and then you can see what's on the screen, but the camera can't. So it almost becomes like a one-way mirror. There are tons of different prompters out there at all kinds of different price points. They are things that used to only be available to like professional studios, but now you can get ones that just use your phone or a tablet or whatever it might be. I really do prefer a prompter like the one I'm using right now because I am using one, which is the Elgato prompter. The reason I like this is it's one piece. It has a built-in display, so I don't have to think about the display. It has one cable that connects to my computer, and then I can just run the software through there. I actually have a foot pedal that I'm going through my script and my outline as I'm going through all this. Believe it or not, I didn't just memorize everything I'm trying to communicate to you. I am using a script. I also like prompters like this that have their own built-in displays because since they're not relying just on your phone or your tablet, you can use them for other things as well. I use this when I'm not using a script or an outline. I can monitor myself on it. If I am doing an interview for a podcast or just any video call, instead of having my camera here and like my computer screen where I see the other person over here, so I'm always looking away, I can just put the person on the screen right here and I can basically maintain direct eye contact with them the whole time as I'm looking directly into the screen of the prompter. Some prompters have remote controls that let you advance the script through it, while others have voice control options, so they're going to track you as you're talking. Others, you can use your keyboard, you can scroll through. I have a foot pedal right now, so I'm controlling this with my feet. Look, Mom, no hands. And that lets me pause, reverse, advance the script however I want. That's something I found works best for me. If you're choosing to use a teleprompter, it's important to choose what works best for you. Some people are just more comfortable with other things than others. I should have scripted that out a little better, maybe. This really is like one of those like monkey's paw situations where here's a good thing, but here's the bad side of it. Prompters are amazing. The downside is that reading from a teleprompter is not natural. It feels super weird at first, and it takes a lot of time to look and sound natural without the prompter being distracting to your audience. So what that means is you don't want to just be looking and seeing your eyes go back and forth as you're reading the lines on the prompter, and you don't want to sound super robotic. You want to know how to confidently read your script, be able to even look away, think of your own thoughts, come back to your script, add lines, move things around. Even though I do have a word-for-word script, there are times as I'm recording where it just makes more sense to kind of flip things around or add something in or cut something out. So I am actually mentally editing every time. This whole chunk I've been saying right now is not scripted. The prompter is not moving at all. It's just something I thought I should add in right now. So that kind of shows how you can go back and forth. And then the last thing I'll say, see now I'm transitioning back to the prompter, is just a reminder that you don't have to stick with one method or the other. Scripts and outlines are both tools. If you have a hammer in your toolbox, you don't have to use the hammer for every project. But hopefully this has helped add a few more tools to your podcast toolbox so you can make the best episodes possible. And if you want to dive deeper into podcast production workflows, check out these videos right here.